Well, welcome back, everyone. Today I'm honored to be joined by Dr. Mark Coppenger. Thank you for joining me.
Great to be here. Thanks for asking.
Yeah, my pleasure. So, quick introduction. You have a BA from Ochita. Am I
Yes,
saying that right?
that's how most people do it. It's Washita. It's an Indian name.
Washita.
I'm having to learn to say Lata instead of Lata. So yeah, it's
Yeah,
Washita.
Washita.
It's all over Arkansas. River, mountains, park, all that.
Okay,
But that's a long way away.
got it. And then you have an MDiv from Southwestern,
Right.
a PhD from Vanderbilt, and you were also the director of the National Endowment for the Humanities.
We had a community education project funded by NEH and Vanderbilt, so I directed that for a couple of years.
Yeah, and then you were the former managing editor of the Kairos Journal. Am I
Kairos
saying?
Journal.
Yep.
It's a journal leading pastors to engage the culture prophetically. Has about 2,400 articles still online. It's kairosjournal.org, and it's a great resource.
Yeah. You've been a senior pastor of 3 different churches.
Yeah,
You were also an infantry lieutenant colonel in the
right,
Army Reserve.
right.
You've done mission trips around the globe, Brazil, Russia, Sudan, and a bunch of other places.
Yeah,
You are currently a visiting lecturer of philosophy here at New St. Andrews College,
right.
and you're husband, father, and grandfather. Lots of different stuff.
Lots of stuff. Lots of stuff.
Yeah.
It's only if excellence gets in your way. If you have no standards, you can cover a lot of ground. So maybe
Great,
the river
great
flat.
way to live your life. Yeah.
Exactly.
So we'll jump right in with philosophy. And throughout history, there have been a couple fundamental questions which humans have always asked. One of which is, who are we as a species?
Right.
Right? There are some people that are currently promoting the idea that we're kind of a plague on the planet,
Right.
that we're the bacteria, and we need to be cleansed and eliminated.
Right. Right.
But I thought I'd ask a philosopher, who are we as a species?
Well, of course, we're made in the image of God. We're His special creation, and we have a cultural mandate in Genesis 1 to fill the earth and exercise dominion, and so we have a big job to do, and we're His special people. We're fallen, of course. We're messed up, but as it says in Romans, we can perceive certain order to nature, and so we can take cues there. But in Romans 2:14-15, we have the law written on our hearts with our conscience accusing and excusing. So we're not just a blank slate. He's endowed us with a lot of revelation, and so we got a lot to work with, but we're tossing it aside. It's crazy. But you're right about the environment. The environmentalists are just saying, we got too many people. This was a big deal even back when I was in grad school. There's a guy who was pushing for ZPG, zero population growth. And if you had more than 2 kids, if you did more than replace yourself, then you were transgressive. And, it's kind of the Malthus thing. Things are just crazy. We're just going to be choking on each other's fumes or whatever. I came across something way back in Harper's Magazine, of all things. And it said that if you had all the people on Earth, all the people on Earth were each given, I think it was 10 yards by 10 yards, a hut, and then they were put in Texas, you'd have enough room left over to put Oklahoma in there without any people. I thought, that's impossible. So I've been doing math, and then I've worked on Kairos Journal with some Brits, and they did some math, and I came up, I think we're more over 8 billion now, but we were 7-something billion when I did the math. And I figured that if we stood close enough, like 4 people within a square yard, so, 18 inches, 18 inches, like that, kind of like sitting at Wrigley Field, actually, in Chicago, that you could put everybody on Earth, all 7 billion, I think it was in the city limits of Houston, Texas. And I thought, that's great. So I tried it on the Brits one day. I was meeting in New York with the Kairos Journal crew, and they said, we say you can put them all on the Isle of Wight. So our footprint is now you don't want to stand to a square yard in Houston in the summer, but still, our footprint's very small. And people say, "Oh no, we're drowning." No, we're not. We got plenty of room. And actually, there are a lot of cultures now that aren't replacing themselves, and so we're seeing shrinkage here.
I mean, Europe recently dropped, and maybe it wasn't that recently, but they dropped below the 2-person. The number that is necessary for a population to sustain itself.
That's exactly right. I think I read recently Italy was 1.2.
Yeah.
So you half yourself each generation. It's
right.
crazy. It's insane.
Yeah, and eventually, and that's part of the reason why we saw a lot of those countries struggle so much with COVID.
Yeah.
Is because it was just a bunch of old people.
Yeah, well, that's a good point. I haven't heard
don't.
that, but that makes sense. And also, that's why they're so desperate for immigrants to to fill. You got all these people retiring. The kids aren't having kids, and so in Germany, traditionally let's bring Turkish people in so that they can do a lot of the jobs, and it's insane.
Yeah. And it kind of makes you wonder, like, why did we not realize this? Like, surely it's an intelligent, like, it's not that difficult to figure out, like, hey, if you have two people and they have one kid,
Yeah,
eventually you're going to run out of people.
yeah,
How did we not realize that this was eventually going to lead to the
yeah.
elimination of our population?
I just think a lot of people don't do the math because they're so concerned about their own fun, their own deal right now. In fact, a lot of people just say, I don't even want one kid. So abortion is enormous. I think I read this thing, I think it was a New York magazine when I was up there once, and it said that New York was the single child capital of the world. That let's just have one. Let's just check that box off and we'll have one. And but then abortion takes out even that one. So we're very self-centered, and we're just thinking about the pleasures. Like, wait, I can't eat in nice restaurants. I have to take the snot-nosed kid along, and we can't travel freely. And I've got my agenda, and I need to stay high speed, low drag, and hostile, agile, and mobile. And these kids are a drag, so they do the personal math and don't care anything about the nation.
And interestingly, it's also a sign of prosperity. Like, if you I was recently in Africa, and they have enormous amounts of children.
Yeah.
Sure, the kids are running around, eating dirt and drinking water out of a hose that's giving them cholera.
Right.
But there's a lot of kids.
There are a lot of kids.
Right? And in America, like, you see some of the billionaires have multiple kids because they understand that, they want to replace themselves, and the people who are the lowest class often have a lot of kids as well.
Exactly right.
But it's somewhere in the middle that you kind of, like, you have just enough money where you want to spend it on yourself, and you're not really thinking about the replacement rate.
Exactly right. I think I read in a magazine, I think it was Parade magazine, which is a Sunday insert in the paper where we lived, and they gave the estimate, and I think this was like 40 years ago, of how much money it takes to raise a kid from cradle through college. And I think at that time it's like $250,000. And for a young couple to think, we don't even have enough money for a Big Mac, how in the world could we possibly have more than one? But I know big families that sent kids to Northwestern. I used to pastor in Evanston, had a lot of Northwestern students. And, just a godly family would have a bunch of kids, and they would and it was $55,000 a year to go to Northwestern. And they just do it somehow, and God makes a way. But I think people are intimidated. Same thing with marriage even. They just don't even get married. Oh, look at all the divorces. Oh, my goodness. I don't want to get into that briar patch. And so we're terrified, we're selfish, and we end up just lonely.
Yeah, and there's kind of a reason for that. Like, I mean, divorce rates have gone up, and oftentimes the men are the ones who lose out on the divorce, and so they're far less likely to engage in marriage in the first place. And as far as, like, having kids and sending them to college, it's like it's difficult to run the math, and part of this is also because you're assuming that you will continue at your current rate throughout all of your child's life.
Yeah.
And in fact, I think it's somewhat clear that once you have a kid, you almost immediately, like, step up your game.
Yeah.
You find another gear because your intrinsic motivation is to feed your child.
It's true.
And so you will find a way. You will
God's
feed the
providence
kid.
is astonishing. I mean, when we became church planters, or I was the pastor, church planter in Evanston, I think my income was about $12,000 a year, and so I was supply teaching at Wheaton and Elmhurst and Trinity, and I was subbing in schools, and my wife had a job working as the secretary to a school superintendent, and our daughter was about to head to college, and I think they did an analysis of our income, and I think they thought I was living on an interstate with a stolen shopping cart or something like that. And lo and behold, so she got a break on her tuition and got a loan. And then all of a sudden, Kairos Journal called and said, could you work for us? And all of a sudden, I have more money. And it was just one thing after another. And my son, who was in college, played basketball so well that he got a free ride to a school. Pardon me, getting over a cold. And so it all worked together. And she finished in 3 years, and And more and more, I mean, you work harder, you apply yourself, but you're also saying, "Wow, what in the world have you done? Thank you, Lord."
Yeah. And there's also the study of who I am, which just kind of ties into identity politics have become a huge thing
Right.
in the past maybe 50 years,
Yeah.
somewhere in there.
Yeah.
And also, it feels like it's gotten less practical.
Hmm.
I'm not old enough to know this for sure, but it seems like it used to be your identity was what could you give, what value could you provide to the world,
Yeah.
and now it's who do I feel like, how do I what makes me happy or what makes me
Yeah.
feel good,
Yeah.
and that's my identity is.
Yeah. Forgive my coughing. Sorry.
No, you're fine.
Yeah, I've been introduced to new germs up here in Idaho.
Yes,
Just as they
and
would be if they came to
it's
Nashville.
cold season.
It is, but anyway, yeah. I mean, it is interesting to use the word practical, and I think you use it in terms of like service or making a difference or an impact on the world instead of being drawn in on yourself. I mean, I think some people are very practical in one sense. Like if you have a young lady in law school and she has, some promiscuous thing on the side, and then she gets pregnant, she's thinking, "Wait, I'm working on my career in law school, and I got to keep going. I got to stay on the fast track. I can't be a single mom with this and that." So she aborts, and now she can go on and work on the law review and get her degree and get a corporate job somewhere. So she's very practical. I mean, the kids, but you're speaking more in terms of service, making impact on the world, and yeah, that's just died for a lot of people. This was a long time ago, maybe 30 years ago. There was a lady who did analysis of cultural trends. Her name wasn't her real name, was Faith Popcorn. And she would go around like the ghetto and ask people like what kinds of shoes they want. And then she'd go to Nike and they'd pay her a lot of money and they'd come up with Air Jordans or something like this. So anyway, one of the things she came up with was cocooning. And she said it used to be that people sat on their front porch and waved at their neighbors, and it was just kind of a neighborly thing. Now they get in and they have 3 deadlocks and they have a home entertainment center and they have their internet and all that, and they get in their little cocoons. And so we're becoming very inward turning. I think largely the Democrat Party is violating the 10th commandment in that it's built on coveting so much. There's so much resentment. I need that much stuff, and so you start to kill your spirit when you live a covetous life. I think power is a big deal. If you can do identity politics, like, okay, you have the haves and the have-nots. You have the oppressors and the oppressed. And I'm in this class, and so I've been put down. And in fact, if I do intersectionality, if I am, for example, if I am not only black, but a woman, but gay,
a black, trans, gay woman, whatever it is, yeah.
I
start to tick boxes.
You indeed. In fact, I got my degree at Vanderbilt, which is not warmly evangelical, but there were guys in the philosophy department who had a Christian background and they could respect me. The divinity school had just gone nuts. I asked one of the profs once, "Do you ever have an evangelical in the faculty?" And he said, "No, we take a more reasoned approach to religion than that." Like, well, excuse me. When I got back from, I moved back to Nashville in 2011 to direct the extensions for the seminary I served. Vanderbilt had just appointed a black lesbian as dean of the divinity school. And I thought, okay, you guys are really shining in the universe of what's happening now. So yeah, if I can say, whatever shortfall I have in my life, like I didn't achieve this or I didn't do this or that, then you can blame it on somebody, And so
Right.
It's wonderful to be a victim. That's the coin of the realm today, to be a victim. And so if you can pile up victimhood stuff, then you're constantly free from accountability. I remember in Chicago, I lived up there 17 years off and on. And I remember where this new mayor came in, there was some wilding. I don't know if you know the expression. It's kind of like a mob gathering, like let's all meet on North Michigan Avenue and just, scratch cars or something and holler. And so he said, well, this is not appropriate. But if the big shots in the city had provided more opportunities for the people down, they wouldn't do that. So he gave them a blank check, basically saying, oh, you poor children, you had to do that kind of thing because you were deprived. So if you can live through life where every stumble you make, every shortfall that you experience is somebody else's fault, that's wonderful. But it's not just now I feel better in my home. It's like a power play. And so you can force people to, you use the wrong pronoun for me, and I'm wounded and you put me in peril. And so a teacher will lose his job because he refused to say she to a he. And so it's a great game of power playing and freedom from accountability. Why not play it,
And there was a woman who went viral somewhat yesterday on Twitter that she was interviewed by some news site, and they were asking her why she and a bunch of other people were looting all these stores. I think it was actually in Chicago. Okay. And she was like, well, the reason is that we need to loot all of the Gucci stores because it's reparations.
Oh, yeah.
I need to feed my family, and so I'm going to loot the Gucci stores because the white people have oppressed us for so long.
Reparation shopping, they call it, I think. Yes.
Yes. How do you, as far as like, that is the situation that we're in, but we want to get to a place where people take accountability and responsibility for what they do. And like, you can't, I was listening to a guy, Alex Hormozy, a couple of days ago, and he was talking about the sales process, actually. But he was saying when you are selling something to someone, you want them to understand that they have the power to make change in their life, and they're kind of the only one who does. And half the time they're like, well, I don't have the time, or I can't, I don't feel good about this decision. And he's like, you're giving your power away somewhere else. And so the point of, sales is to bring that person along to, we're going to help you make a change for yourself. How do you get people to stop giving their power away to other things that are going to make them less powerful?
Yeah, no, good question. I'm kind of heartened by how crazy America's gotten for this reason. I think that we're pushing it so far that just all kinds of people are waking up and saying, this is insane. I mean, I think the trans thing and the mutilation and the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence having an honored night at LA Dodgers and the library readings and all that kind of stuff. I think people are kind of waking up, and part of me just says, no, just keep pushing it. Just keep pushing it, because, the old thing, what is it? The night is always darkest just before the dawn.
Right.
And I've seen stories of awakenings happening where they had to have a jolt. Jonathan Edwards even, he talks about there were certain tragedies in the neighborhood in Northampton. This happened at Marshall University. It's a strange kind of thing, but Marshall is in Huntington, West Virginia, and the football team in 1970 was wiped out in a plane crash.
I remember this.
There was a movie, We Are Marshall. Matthew McConaughey was in it. So anyway, I was teaching one of our extensions up in New York, and I ran into the director of student ministry for our group, for our denomination up at West Point. And I said, West Point. And he said, yeah. And I said, I was the one at Northwestern University in Chicago, in Evanston. And he said, yeah, well, I was at the Air Force Academy and at Marshall. I said, Marshall? That's where they had that crash that wiped everybody out. And he said, yeah, I was a campus minister when it happened. And he said, after it happened, there was a revival on campus. People got very concerned about their souls, and people started coming to. He said he came back after Christmas. He was in the house there that they used, and I think 6 students knocked on the door at 9:00 and said, "Is this where the Jesus man is?" or something? And they wanted to know how to get saved, and he didn't know him from Adam. And he said, "This is the way it was all spring." And what happened was there was such a jolt to the system that God did a work. As I got into it, I made 11 trips to Huntington, wrote a book about it called God and Humanity at Marshall. It turns out there was kind of a revival before, and then there was one in the 60s, and there are different things. So I ended up writing the spiritual history of Marshall University. But it is so interesting to see how God moves in when things just get really, really crazy. The prayer revival, 1857, 58, and the like. So there are many examples of that. Here and there, you're having people who are hardcore atheists who are saying, you know what, they seem to have more life and more joy or something. Even Richard Dawkins, who is one of the real hardcore atheists, Daniel Dennett and
Yeah.
Chris Hitchens and Sam Harris, he's now saying, Christian civilization ain't so bad. I was reminded of the old joke. The lady brings her husband to a psychiatrist and says he thinks he's a chicken. And he says, well, I've dealt with things like that. I think we can help. And she said, well, not so fast. We need the eggs. So anyway, it's kind of like these atheists are saying, I'm glad. Even Ayan, she's actually making steps as a new Christian, maybe. Ayan Hirsi Ali. She was a Somali who fled after FGM. She fled to Holland, and she was making a video with one of the Van Gogh offspring down the line, and he was murdered, and she fled to different places. I was in Australia when she was down there, and then she was in America. And she basically said, I think the book was called Infidel. She basically said the safest place to be. Oh, she was a lesbian and an atheist. Having formerly been a Muslim, she said the best place to be is get around Christian culture. That's where you're the safest.
Right.
And so people are kind of waking up and saying, I think we ought to maybe listen to, and even, you've got the Jordan Peterson thing and the Joe Rogan thing, and who is the comedian actor in England who's he's making first steps. So it's sort of like they're doing some of our work for us, making life so horrible and crazy that people say, well, maybe I ought to take a look at that.
Right. I think there's a movement of cultural Christianity being adopted at the moment. I saw Elon Musk was most recently in the Jordan Peterson interview.
Yeah.
He was like, I'm culturally a Christian because I might not believe all of the things that the Bible tells me, but I do believe that if we want to survive as a civilization, if we want to grow as a culture, then we need to be Christian. Cultural Christianity is the only way to maintain, sustain, and eventually expand what we have going for us right now. And Richard Dawkins, I think said the same thing. He's like, I've realized that I am a cultural Christian because I'm living in the ruins of the Christian civilization, and I like it a whole lot better than the atheist civilization or the Muslim civilization that's coming in.
It's remarkable. I think Russell Brand is another one who's kind of come around.
Yeah,
just like
that's who it is.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to think of. By the way, real quick, I work for this retired CEO of American Standard Corporation. They make Trane air conditioning and toilets and Westinghouse air brakes. And when he retired, he did so much good for the company. They gave him quite a bit of money, and he has just done all kinds of philanthropy, and one starting this website. But he had the idea with a couple of other guys to have a conference in Vienna talking about the death of the church in Europe, essentially, and then the explosion of Islam. I mean, there are neighborhoods in Paris, you can't go to, Banlieue, and then you have, I think Bradford, England is kind of like a no-go zone for, I think the sheriff of Nottingham is a Muslim right now, which is kind of ironic.
Yes.
But anyway, they're populating, I think the most common birth name in England, I read this the other day, is Muhammad, and so just let 1,000 flowers bloom, God in his wonderful garden. No. And so we had a conference there, and we came up with this booklet. We invited about 200 people to actually it was a Catholic retreat center on the heights above Vienna, where the Polish cavalry under Jan Sobieski beat back the Muslims, and they had to go back into the Balkans and the like. And we had people from the House of Lords and journalists from Jewish journalists from London, and we had Archbishop of Nigeria, Peter Akinola, and we had somebody up from Australia and somebody from the Parliament of Italy. It's the most interesting gathering, and we argued the death of the church and the explosion of Islam in Europe is just erasing the Judeo-Christian heritage. And so we have this little booklet, Legatees of a Great Inheritance, How the Judeo-Christian Tradition has shaped the West, and we talked about the influence on everything, just war theory to the status of women, to architecture, to to all the arts, to science, and all this. We're just throwing it away. By the way, I just picked up this book again, The Cube and the Cathedral, by George Weigel, and he just says the birth rates dropped in Europe. They're just becoming squirrely, essentially. What happened? And it turns out we've replaced the cathedral with this kind of innocuous cube, this gateway in Paris they built that has no soul and so big you can put Notre Dame in the middle of it. And he just said, we've traded the cathedral for the cube, and we're reaping the whirlwind. So yeah, it's just manifestly so distinct what you've got when Christianity moves in, and I would say Judeo-Christianity, and when atheism moves in, or Islam. My goodness.
Yeah, and I think actually the architecture is a good way of determining where a culture
Yeah.
is at.
Yeah.
As and interestingly, we have exchanged Notre Dame for the Arc de Triomphe for this. I don't know. I haven't seen
Yeah.
this, but
Yeah.
this enormous, boring, soulless
Right.
piece of architecture.
Right.
And we've replaced the quality for not even quantity. It's like we've replaced the quality with death, is what it feels
Yeah.
like.
Well, yeah. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, I'm fond of saying that beauty inspires greatness.
Yeah.
And when you see beauty around you, as what people and architecture, and if the world around you is beautiful, you are going to be inspired to do great things.
Yeah.
And we have lost that. And as it comes out of that, we seem to be less encouraged, less joyful, less like we build less things that we're not going to see the finish of. The Sagrada Familia in Spain has been being built for a long time, but like the people who started it may not ever see it finished.
Yeah.
But that's because it's worth building something that big and that beautiful.
It's amazing.
It takes longer than just your lifetime.
Yeah. No, it's amazing. I've been to a lot of cathedrals, and that one I was a little leery of because it looked like so weird, like a gingerbread cake or something. I don't know what it was. It just kind of a funky thing. But we were in Barcelona. I went there, and I was just gobsmacked. And walking inside it, I loved it. I mean, I love a lot of. I've been, of course, to Notre Dame and all kinds of places around about, and Chartres, and anyway. But yeah, that is amazing. And by the way, I just think the architecture of this corner, the corner here with is it Friendship
Square,
Friendship Square, and the sword and shovel, just the gracefulness of this and the color, it's just inspiring. I mean, I do think there's a place for variety and whimsy. I mean, in London they have one, they call it the Gherkin. It's kind of bulges and comes to a point, and you have the London Eye, which is a big big kind of roller. I mean, a big Ferris wheel, and then you've got St. Paul's, and even Frank Gehry, who does weird stuff. He's an architect, and sometimes the buildings are kind of twisted or like they're falling a little bit, or they have a explosion. We have in Grant Park in Chicago, we have a band shell, and around is these big sheets of metal. It looks like it's a lion's mane, and there's a place for whimsy, but there's kind of a funny revolution in architecture. The Bauhaus school basically said form follows function. So you just tell me what you need. And again, this may be my last day on earth with this call. Forgive me. But anyway, the deal was, you tell me what you want. We need some study carols, and we need this, and we need that, and all the other stuff. It's just expense and waste and the like, and vanity. So anyway, there's a Catholic priest. He's kind of a renegade named E. Michael Jones. And he wrote a book called Living Machines. And he was saying they're just boxes and the charm of neighborhoods. By the way, there's some wacky stuff where we live up on Fort Russell.
There's some weird houses.
There's a lot of cool stuff, but just walking among with the personality and the ingenuity. I mean, there's a charm to a certain chaos too.
Yeah.
But these were just so inspiring. So I forget who built it, whether it's the Sony building or the IBM building or something, but a guy named I.M. Pei, P-E-I, an architect in New York, built this building, and then he put a kind of an ornament on top as though it was like a Chippendale cabinet. And I don't know, that probably cost another $1 million just to put that on. Oh, people were just so upset with him, like what a waste it is, because they had that simple box-like thing, no extra ornamentation, no soul. And he said, just deal with it. And now it's really a treasured piece of architecture. So, and by the way, when someone does a piece of art, acrylic or watercolor or encaustic, if you don't like it, you can put it in the basement or something like that. And but not architecture. It costs a lot, and it's going to be there. You're going to live with it. And so it's so great when people really invest in something that will lift spirits or engage or I don't know, charm or what have you. And
Yeah, and they have personality, and personality is
they
not
do.
bad. I mean, there are some modern buildings that like they look funky, but
Yeah.
they're also kind of like it's fun.
Yeah, they're
Like it's an
fun.
interesting design, and okay, let's
Yeah.
try that out. But the kind of soulless concentration camp esque
As absolutely.
buildings are it's demoralizing.
Yeah.
And also you talked a bit about the music and culture
Yeah.
is also a good way to test
Oh, absolutely.
the pulse of the culture.
Absolutely.
And our music is nothing like what it used to be. Last night I was listening to Tchaikovsky on
Right.
the way home from the Lagos football game,
Right.
and it's like nothing that
Yeah.
exists that
Yeah.
has been created in the past 100 years.
No, I know.
It's completely different, and the same thing with the art. Like our modern art is. There was this one guy that taped a banana to a wall,
Yeah.
and I think it sold for a ridiculous amount of money, and then someone ate the banana,
Yeah.
which was very entertaining.
Yeah.
But that's the kind of thing that people are like, oh wow, so brave, so strong. Look at you.
Yeah.
It's almost sad.
It's
is what it is.
ideology. I mean, Tom Wolfe, not Thomas Wolfe, he's another guy. Tom Wolfe wrote a book called The Painted Word. And in it, he says, anymore, it's really just serving ideology. We're just trying to make a political point or be transgressive. In fact, one of the texts I used in seminary was like 20th century art or modernism, subtitled The Lure of Heresy. And so, like, if we can just stick our finger in the eye, or if we can be radical, or we can do this or that, that's the whole point. Yeah, but what about just in terms of painterly quality? What about in terms of bringing life? We have tickets to the Nashville Symphony, which is very, very good. People think only country music in Nashville. No, it's a very fine symphony in a very fine hall. And we go to the classical series. We buy half classical, which is I think 7 performances a year. And so every time they'll introduce a new guy, I mean, we'll listen to. I mean, sometimes it's program music like Groffa's Grand Canyon Suite or Pictures of an Exhibition by Mussorgsky, but a lot of times it's Tchaikovsky, it's Mahler, it's what have you. But they'll put a new guy in, and quite often it's kind of atonality or artsy stuff, and it's kind of like, oh yeah, that other stuff's been done. Now we're going to do new stuff. It's like with poetry in many cases that it's just, I mean, give me something that rhymes now and then, and not just like, yes, the smell of this, I saw this, sadness. I mean, that's the poem. Like, what? What was that? And so, yeah, now I know they put a lot of work in some of the new stuff, but you're exactly right. It's just not as engaging. And I don't know, just stunning in a way,
It's not its own. It doesn't have its own personality.
Yeah.
It's not like its own creature. And there is a place for like some of the newer music, not all of the newer music, but like
sure.
Some of the old Kanye West songs.
Yeah.
There's sometimes
I'll take
a place.
your word on that. I haven't followed Kanye much, but anyway.
There's sometimes a place for that.
Yeah,
but
sure.
but we have stopped creating the lovely classical music as far as I've seen. I haven't seen any people doing that anymore.
Oh, by the way, when the symphonies are formed in places like Cairo and around the world, they're playing Mahler. They're playing, it's not like this deep symphonic treasure chest that they have somewhere up the Nile River. I mean, that we do that stuff for sure. Yeah.
And we were talking earlier about the fact that you kind of need like a jolt.
Yeah.
To realize where you are.
Right.
I was talking last week with David Shannon about this topic specifically, and I was wondering, do we almost need Kamala Harris to win to push us?
Well, I've wondered
further
that. I've wondered that. I have to tell you, when Barack won the first time, and he was doing a variety of things, I thought, well, good. Now we'll know better, and it just
Turns
seems
out
like
not so
much. And then we keep pressing, and like, yeah, okay, so we got Biden, and I keep hoping, but that is the silver lining if she wins, that I think she'll take things
so far
crazier and crazier. That somebody once said the shift from, you have the classic age, the church age, modernism, postmodernism, where everything's relative, no overarching meta narrative. And then I think it was Gene Veith who said, with the 911, with the twin towers falling down, even New Yorkers realized there was evil, that there was a real.
Right.
So maybe that jolted to them. But we have a great capacity to accommodate madness, and yet I kind of hope we're already to the point where we're saying enough is enough, and we'll vomit this up.
Yeah, and we've seen Donald Trump is actually exploding in the polls, especially after Kamala. The more interviews Kamala Harris does, the worse her campaign is.
I agree.
She continues to fall apart. I hope she goes on Joe Rogan. I think that was. I think someone was like, that might happen, and if she did, it'd be
like clubbing baby seals. I mean,
I don't think she'd last 15 minutes.
Yeah, but I think a lot of people don't care. I'm up on Fort Russell. There are more One Idaho, gay flags, Harris Waltz stuff up there. I'm told that a fair number of them from the University of Idaho over here, something like that, where you have a lot of the craziness in campuses. I mean, I have guys where I go to church that there are profs there that are good guys in the sciences, but yeah, I just think, oh boy, as long as they keep pushing it, it's just like no Trump. By the way, I think it's come to pass that particularly with abortion, that they take the Republican Party to be the party of some kind of moral accountability. That there's like, I mean,
party of your dad
or something like that. And so even if you don't like this and this and this, it's at least they have a whiff of morality or something like that, and that is what drives these people crazy.
Yeah,
that they think, somebody might draw limits or say, hey, this ain't right, and then I won't put up with that. So
yeah,
I think it's
and there are the 10. So there are like the 10 or maybe 20% of the people who will never vote for Trump.
Yeah.
Because he is Trump.
Yeah.
Because he does the things
it's higher
that
than
Trump
that,
does.
But
it may be. So there's those people, and then there's the X amount that will always vote for Trump.
Yeah.
He could do whatever he wanted. There was one person.
Shoot somebody in Manhattan.
There was one person actually that was like, I would vote for Kamala Harris even if I saw her run over a child on live TV.
Oh, yeah.
Like, they're the never Trumpers and they're the always Trumpers. But the people in the middle, I
think Howard Stern the other day said, with regard to Kamala, I'm supporting you, but I'd vote for that wall if you weren't here. I mean, which seemed like not a very good compliment to her, but I think you're right. You're right. Yeah.
Yeah. Going back to the architecture and such, you mentioned form over function.
Yeah.
Which I think is a lovely way to describe America.
Or function over form. They would say you're right. Yeah. I mean, function is the thing. And if you put the bric-a-brac and the decoration and all that stuff, that's a waste of money.
And function over form is Europe, I feel like.
Yeah.
And function over form is America, and form over function is Europe.
Yeah, well, it used to be. I mean, it's really interesting. I mean, I think more so with the cathedrals and like we have cathedrals and some really elegant buildings. I was in Spokane yesterday, and their government building is a big, almost like Italianate tower, and I mean, they have some cool looking stuff.
The stuff from the 1900s is really beautiful.
Yeah.
A lot of these buildings. My dad owns the McConnell building over there, and it's lovely. Like
it
you look
is,
up at the up higher past all the windows,
Yeah.
and there's just this beautiful there's wolves that are hanging over the edge, and you would never see that unless you looked, and it's really lovely.
It is lovely. Incidentally, I mean, he's a mess in a lot of ways, but when King Charles of England was Prince Charles, one of his causes was pushing back against the soulless architecture of these housing developments all through England. They just clear out a place and I think tear down all the trees and call it Sherwood Forest or something. But at any rate, he was standing up for the classic old kind of gnarly English cottage and this and that. He was sort of saying we've lost our soul, and I mean he's helped them lose their soul in other ways. And it used to be he would be the defender of the faith, and he wanted to be defender of faith. I mean he's eroded a fair number of things, but at that point he was right.
He was spot on.
Yeah,
yeah, absolutely. And Elon Musk had Tesla X, whatever you call
Yeah.
it. They had the event recently where they announced all these new robotic taxis and
Yeah.
automatic
Yeah.
buses and whatnot. But one of the things he focused on was, hey, we have way too many parking lots in America, and we should have more trees. I saw a graph the other week of the amount of trees or large forests that have in the world, and it was like a steadily decreasing curve, kind of a little bit, fallen off the edge,
Right.
almost. And he's like, hey, we actually need to bring this back. This is
Oh,
a big
that's
deal.
good.
We need to have more trees, and not just because the environment, but also like it actually is a more lovely and peaceful world.
It is.
I don't want parking lots everywhere.
Yeah.
I would rather have trees.
As Joni Mitchell sang, they paid paradise and they put up a parking lot. This is from the 60s. But anyway, I walk up the hill. It's my little exercise. Walking down the hill to work is really great. Walking up the hill for a 76-year-old sometimes is a little bit more. I cough up blood a few times when I go up. But anyway, I climb up to Polk at the top, and I turn left, and I walk down past St. Mary's Catholic Church and, along the ridge there. And the trees, the colors, it's almost like you want to just get a lawn chair and just sit out there and just say, glory,
Admire
glory.
it.
It's wonderful. It is so wonderful. And the trees are so bright. And actually, the Palouse, first time I came down here, I'd heard Moscow, Idaho. Moscow doesn't sound good. And remote Idaho, clearly this is where the Unabomber lives. I thought
we are just north of nothing.
Yeah. Well, I came down from, I visited an old Wheaton colleague at Post Falls, and I was coming down, and I saw the Palouse, and I thought, I'm in Magic Land. I mean, this is like a drawing from, some exotic movie or something like that. I got down here, and they had the sign that said, welcome back Vandals or something. I thought, this is a tough town if they welcome Vandals, but it turned out it was the mascot. But it's a very charming, beautiful place. But this place is splendid. In town, you've got the trees and this charming Main Street, and then you go out and you've got the Palouse. And I'm thinking, am I in a dream? So, yeah, trees, but also rolling croplands and so forth. Beautiful.
And I think that's true with a lot of small towns across America. It has its own personality, and it feels like home a little bit.
Yeah.
And the big city doesn't as much.
No, I agree.
And there are places for the big city, but I think there's also a place for the small towns,
Absolutely.
which are slowly being wiped off the map,
Absolutely.
unfortunately. We'll get back a little bit to identity politics. We talked about the shift from that practical focus to more of a personal, like, how do I feel?
Absolutely.
What is the correct way to think about identity?
Well, by the way, we've just been into philosophy. I'm teaching the junior philosophy series this year. We've been reading Epictetus and a Stoic, and he just says these people are driven back and forth by their feelings and this and that. And he says, he overdoes it, by the way. Like, look, your kid dies. Well, yeah, but a kid died in China. You didn't lose your sleep over that. I mean, so relax. But at any rate, feelings rule today. In fact, it's funny. I watch a fair amount of sports. We're watching right now the playoff series, and we watch football, and the little person who grabs the coach at the end of the player. How do you feel? How do you feel that you've just beaten the world champion, or how did you feel that you broke your leg? What are they doing in journalism school? That it's all feeling. Well, I feel terrible that we won. And no, I mean, what a stupid question. But at any rate, feelings rule now, and people are triggered. And oh my God, I've been reading papers, and one of the students said something about you can open a door for a woman and she'll be offended because it implies paternalism and all this kind of stuff.
The patriarchy.
So patriarchy. So
obviously.
It rules. So now we have a new Bill of Rights, and it's like including not to be offended. Like, no, in a real freedom of speech, freedom of press world, that's the clash of ideas. I mean, and on college campuses, these little snowflakes, and oh my goodness, somebody, we've got to have a little safe space, and we got grow up, Skippy, but feelings rule today. It's terrible.
Yeah, one of the great things about America is that we are free to be offended.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that is not true everywhere, because freedom of speech is only important when it's someone else you don't agree with.
Right.
And we've lost that.
And by the way, one of the things we talk about here is comedians and humor in the West.
Yes.
You do not have that many now living Muslim comedians. I mean, and even honestly, it's just, and I'm not sure there are really that many in Japan either. They're so neat in Japan. You asked a little bit about earlier on about different cultures around the world, but boy, they do not have a sense of humor. We make fun of ourselves all the time. In fact, I mean, even Jellyfish, the title, he'll poke this way and then he'll get poked back, and sometimes I watch this comedy channel, and they'll have like comedians, comics unleashed, and it'll be what is it called, chocolate version or something. So you have 4 black comedians, and they're making all kinds of jokes about things. And when I was a kid, JJ was on. There was a JJ Walker was a sitcom guy, and he's older than me now. He's on there, and he was talking about, he went on the Home Shopping Network, the black version, and he saw his own stereo on there and stuff like that, and they laugh about that, and then you'll have Jewish comedians making fun of themselves. I saw a documentary about Jewish comedy, and so anyway, this lady was sitting on the beach with her only son, and a rogue wave came up and lifted the child, took him out to sea, and she's on her knees crying to God, "It's my only boy, and he means so much to me." And miraculously, a wave picked her kid up and put him right back beside her. She looks and says, "He had a hat," So anyway, the whole theme of the thing is they complain so much. A guy comes to a Jewish, some Jewish women having lunch, and he says, "Is anything all right?" Instead of everything all right. And so those are Jewish jokes about Jews, and we have comics who make fun of Christians and our foibles and the stuff,
and white people, and white.
That's the beauty of it. Absolutely. We make fun of ourselves. What was it? It was a fun thing. Somebody asked one of these comedians on that show, "Is there what is it? The Homeland Security people have just issued a warning and says, what is the least dangerous color, in the warning?" And the guy says, is Caucasian a color, and it's like, okay, we're squirrely in a way or something. So yeah, I picked that one thing, but everybody makes fun of everybody else. And there was an interesting thing that happened. They were going to have a rule in England that you couldn't offend another religious group. This was about the time that they killed these guys up in Scandinavia over the Muhammad cartoon. Some newspaper ran one, and I think he had in his turban, he had like a explosion or something like that, explosive device. And so anyway, all these Muslims are upset, and then you actually have other people, except Christians can hardly ever be upset. And so they were going to make this law, and it went down to a super tight vote. And a lot of the guys, the Christian guys, we should be Christ-like and not offend anybody and bend over backwards. And there's a guy named Rowan Atkinson, who's Mr. Bean. Yeah. He got up and spoke, says, "Are you guys crazy? What do you think comedy is?" And so here's this secular guy, and I think that one of the prime ministers, actually voted against it. But it's like, you don't understand the fact that we can make fun of ourselves and each other is a treasure, and it comes from like thinking a certain humility. You have these cultures that have shame and honor. That's the big thing. Yeah. When I was in Amman, Jordan, once, in the newspaper, Queen Noor, I think it was, in Jordan, was saying, "Please stop with the honor killings." The jails of Amman, a friend of mine who lived there says it's Amman, but I think it's Amman. Anyway, they were filling up with young women on the run from their own relatives, because they'd been seen riding in a car with a Gentile or something like that. Yeah. And so they're there for protective custody. And she says, "What is this?" Again, we're more like guilt and blame, like you did this, but theirs is more shame and honor. It's not that it was a big bad thing, but you have disgraced our family. Now we will kill you. What kind of crazy? How can you get humor out of that?
Yeah. I think America, maybe potentially England, but we are the funniest countries. Yeah. We are very funny. Yeah, we are. And it is a sign.
You're talking about Monty. I heard John Cleese at the Opry House recently, Monty Python guy, and he had an evening with John Cleese.
But it's a sign of cultural Christianity. Is like we are able to make fun of ourselves.
Yeah.
because we don't hold ourselves too highly.
It's exactly right.
And unfortunately, I think that is also under attack.
Yeah.
However, I will add that encouragingly, comedians have been being more offensive
Yeah.
as of late.
Absolutely.
And being like, I think Dave Chappelle was actually a great version of this, a great example.
Yeah.
I think he got canceled, or they tried to cancel him.
Yeah.
And he
just
said
quit,
fine.
Went to Africa or something.
He said fine, and he left, and then he would just do stand up in the park at Seattle without telling anyone. He would just show up and do stand up, and then he came back, and now he's like one of the most popular people again.
Yeah,
and he was like, look, you can't cancel comedy.
Yeah,
it's comedy. It's
but
always
it is. Yeah, exactly right. And I think there's something about humility, which is a Christian, and part of it is. It's just like whatever state I find myself in, I'll be content, or I'll try to learn from this. Common grace. He may have a message for me. I'm not the grandest tiger in the jungle. And by the way, God's sovereign. He's provident. And it's not like my whole fortune depends on whether people think well of me at the moment.
Yeah.
By the way, on Kairos Journal, the guy who funded it, the retired CEO, he had a crisis in his life when his wife died, and then he found the Lord. At the same time, a Muppeteer found the Lord and started going to church. She was raised Catholic in D.C., and I think it was Phi Beta Kappa at Catholic University of America. She was in opera, and then she got into theater, and she went to New York. Long story short, she became a Muppeteer. She invented Meryl Sheep, and she co-hosted the Today Show with the Count once. I mean, they didn't see him. Very talented girl, but she found the Lord. And we've been to New York probably 40 times, and we had a writers meeting, and then we had supper afterwards. And I was sitting by her, and she started talking about dating Seinfeld, and I thought, what in the world? I said, Camille, and he said, yeah, it was kind of serious. He came to D.C. and met my mother, and then I think he got into Scientology and Hollywood and different things.
Yeah.
But she said I was attracted to him because he didn't work blue. And by blue, dirty, essentially, or obscene.
Yeah.
And even in his routines, he didn't work blue. And
right.
So there was that kind of affinity. But she said the vast majority of these guys go for a cheap laugh because they're dirty.
They swear. Yeah,
it's ridiculous, But you're right, yeah.
Because it takes actual, you have to be really clever to come up with something legitimately funny that is not profane.
It's not nasty, yeah. And so it's not that the humor is bad; it's what they've done with it. I mean, as a retired Army guy, I get free tickets in Nashville and even up here if I want to drive to Spokane or Kennewick, and they always have like the comedy club. You can go to Zanies and stuff like that. And I've had friends who've said, "You really don't want to go there because it's just overwhelmingly they just play on the dirty jokes." And it's like I don't want to be in the hall when they do that. It's a shame.
It's not fun. It's not actually funny.
It's not
either.
funny.
It's just objectively not clever or funny.
Yeah.
And I was talking to my dad about this, that after COVID, it feels like we're still a little bit hesitant to see people. Or go outside, and you're still everyone's still a little bit terrified that someone else is going to injure them.
That's exactly.
Which is a weird in 2019 everyone was it felt like everyone was friends, and now it feels like everyone is cautious and not so sure about you.
I think your dad's right.
But I was thinking about how do you get over that, and I think the two of the three ways are church, obviously,
right,
being in that community,
huge.
That's a huge one, but also comedy and music.
Mm-hmm.
When you laugh with other people or you sing with other people, it's actually a huge, you break down so many barriers. And obviously the singing revolution in Estonia is a famous version of this. You also defy tyranny when you defy the government, and this is why they shut down churches, and this is why they banned singing, partly, is when you sing and when you laugh, you you feel this is a fixable problem. I can go out there. These people in here with me, I may not agree with them on everything, but they're still people, and we're going to solve this together. And we have lost that.
I think we have. I think we're almost like we feel we're in a leper colony now, and we have to keep
Yeah.
avoiding things. Yeah, one thing that struck me too that this afternoon we're going to go not because we're huge fans of Cal Poly and the University of Idaho, but we have relatives in town. We're going to go to the Kibbe Dome and we're going to see a ball game. And sports are quite remarkable too. You get together and you
Yes.
wear the same colors and you cheer. That band comes on. You're in an enclosed building. You'll knock your socks off. I'm an old horn blower. I played band. Uh, and in fact, I played in a band with Bill Clinton once. This is very
Really?
odd. It wasn't a combo. It was Arkansas All-State Band, and he's 2 years my
Got it.
older. He played tenor sax. I played trumpet. So in my day, and I played the trumpet. She'll sound from Messiah with a harpsichord and all that. So
Yeah.
have a bit of that. But when that marching band hits the field, there. One thing, by the way, it's interesting. I'm a retired Army reservist, and I did a lot of tours I did 11 in the Pentagon, 2-week tours a year. And I found in sports and in the military remarkable signs of evangelical interest. The bulletin board, flag officers Bible study, this thing for enlisted men, this thing, and these Bible studies. And in our office, I worked at Chief of Army Reserve and Chief of Public Affairs, and we would have evangelicals, and it's Wednesday night, we're going to church or something like that. But anyway, I went to a Washington State game when they played Texas Tech, and then I went and I saw Idaho play Albany. And in both cases, as they hit the field, about a third of each team would run to the far end zone and kneel in prayer. And I thought, what in the world is this? And I remember Texas Tech did it. Well, yeah, those are Texans. They're all Bible Belt. And then the Washington State guys did. So I go to the Kibbe Dome. They're probably, I'm thinking, 20 people from Albany, State University of New York in Albany, were praying in the end zone, and some vandals even were praying in the end zone on the other side. And you put the mic in people's. I mean, the place kicker from Kansas City, Butker.
Harrison Butker. Yeah.
Like he's at Benedictine or something, talking about this and this. And then when we watch these playoffs, we look up the wiki stuff to see personal stuff, and a bunch of these guys are really serious Christians.
Yeah.
So I think funny things are bubbling up there too. But again, the coming together in a sporting event, that was not allowed, and now we're there and we're cheering and passing popcorn. So yeah, we need collegiality and community.
Yeah. Why do you think that in college and in sports and in the military, an outcropping of Christianity is often there?
Boy, it's a great question. Great question. I do think in the military, the group they draw on for recruiting traditionally has been not only in the South but even the far West,
Down to earth.
earth, regular folks or church going. I think that's more of the group they've drawn from. You have groups like FCA that are doing huge work among a Fellowship of Christian Athletes, among the athletes, and there's some very outspoken Christian. I mean, Tony Dungy's been one through the years. Back in the day, Tom Landry. There's an interesting book. It's by a Catholic philosopher. He died recently, named Michael Novak, called The Joy of Sports. And he said sports is kind of like even a taste of heaven, that, the players are forever young. When they get old, they move on. But they're young people. You have sacred space. Wrigley Field, it just takes your breath away when you're there. And Lake Michigan's out there with the sailboats, and you're up in the ivy and all that. And he goes on and he says it's a little taste of heaven. And I think there's something transcendent even about sports in terms of competition and sacrifice. So there's a little bit of that. Also, it takes discipline. I mean, if you're just sleeping, doing drugs and lying on the streets, or you're vastly overweight and you eat ding dongs and watch Home Shopping Network and you're 350 pounds, you're not going to get in the military or
highly unlikely you're going to be a competitive football player.
Right. So if you're just a kind of disaster, you probably you won't go through that. So those people have their lives together to some extent. Now, there's some real crazy people in sports and crazy people in the military, I can tell you.
Yes, there is.
But there is just that little bit of if you're just slicing the curve or something, that there's a certain order in their lives that I think comports a little better with the faith.
Yeah. And the military has lost some of that.
Oh, yeah.
But there's still, interestingly, their most recent ads are all the white guys. the jacked white guys jumping out of airplanes
Oh,
and
was that right?
shooting
Okay.
rockets off and
Interesting.
everything.
Yeah.
People are the comments are amazing because it's like, you can tell we're going to war when all of the U.S. Army ads are full of people who actually would do well in war.
Oh, is that right? I hadn't heard that.
Yes.
Well, DEI has done a lot of. It's
A lot
really
of
funny
damage.
in the Pentagon. Once the chief of public affairs asked me to go down and take notes for him at the briefing from the Department of Defense. They have that disc that has the picture of the Pentagon. You know, if you know that. So anyway, I took my notes. I handed it, emailed them to him, and he got back and said, "Thank you. That did a good job. Just what I needed." And so I was talking to these people in the room there, and we have some civilian people who work in, because it's kind of the press room of the Army. And there are a couple of women there, and I asked one, do I say thank you, sir? Or she said, don't say sir. And I thought, what? And she was really prickly. And I thought, okay. Say thank you, General. And I found out by saying sir, I imply that a general will be a man. And if it were a woman, I wouldn't say thank you, ma'am, because that would be, I don't know, kind of old tradition.
Sexist, maybe?
Yeah, or something. So, and I started there are other things that were just kind of, I have to walk on eggshells now in a way I didn't have to when I came here 10 years earlier.
And if we want a competitive or a military that's going to be the best in the world, which it has been historically,
yes,
DEI should not be our focus.
I agree. I agree.
And unfortunately, it is at the moment.
I just wrote an article on that for a seminary journal, how DEI, and I had substitutes for each word, but it's not. It's bogus.
It's bogus, and
people are running away from it. I mean, the Iowa legislature, the Florida. Right. And it's like, wake up, good.
It's slightly fallen out of favor, and part of it is also like airlines who are Boeing has been in the crossfire at the moment,
exactly right.
because they're promoting DEI in their workspace, and then their planes fall apart. And it's like, if of all of the people to not do DEI, the military and the airplanes, and also probably the cars, you should be the people that, like, I don't want to get on a plane and hear that they picked their flight crew because they were all trans and queer. I want to get on the plane and it's a white guy from Kansas with that mustache whose name is Walt or Mitch or something, and that he's been doing this for 40 years. Old, reliable. That's the guy I want.
You preach, I'll turn the pages. You're right. I tell you, I'm working on a book now on the back burner. I mean, by the way, teaching here has just absorbed every second of my life. I mean, it's exhilarating, but it is really wonderful. But I do have a book in the works, one of them called I Heard a Dream. I heard Martin Luther King's speech on black and white TV back in the day. When I have a dream of the day when, like a kid in Alabama, he judged by the content of his character instead of the color of his skin.
Exactly.
And that's what I heard in my heroes and the youth. My mom was a Michigander, went to school with black students in the 20s in high school. My dad was from East Tennessee, which I don't even think seceded from the, from the Union back in the day. They didn't have slaves up in the hills there. But at any rate, we were very much cheering for the Republicans and integration in the South in Arkansas, pushing back against Jim Crow and a variety of things. And so I was so excited with Jackie Robinson, and Marian Anderson would sing operatic stuff on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial and all that stuff. And so we were so excited when civil rights legislation passed. And then you wake up and it's like Al Sharpton and some of these people, like, what in the world, like Jesse Smollett in Chicago, or I mean, all this kind of stuff. And you think, what in the world happened? Now, colorblindness, as I put it, and I knew people from Selma when I was a kid. I didn't live in Alabama. In those days, if you stood up for colorblindness, they turned the fire hoses on you. Today, if you stand up for colorblindness, they'll turn the media fire hoses on you, the cultural fire hoses on you. And I say that standard of blind justice and the like is what we need. And by the way, on TV, we've got so many people who are doing the kind of the Al Sharpton's grievance thing. And yet there's so many incredibly thoughtful black writers on this issue, from Thomas Sowell to what's the guy's name at Eastern Kentucky, and Jason at the Wall Street Journal, and they're just really, Harris Faulkner on Fox. And yet we showcase these other guys, and it's like, why in the world would you celebrate these guys and make them the voice? And then you look at, I lived in Chicago all those years, and then my grandfather was the founder of the Detroit Economic Club, and we would go up there all the time when Detroit was twice its size that it is now. And I just think of those magnificent cities, and now you turn the cities over to these Democrat the grievance mayors, and it's just like, oh, let's just hammer that, and it's like our people instead of the people, and it just spirals down. And there are now blacks who are defecting to Trump, saying, we've been on their plantation a long time. This is nonsense. We're smarter than this, and they are. And so I'm hopeful there.
Yeah, and someone made the point that like the Democrats have been in office for 12 of the last 16 years.
Yeah.
Not much has gotten a whole lot better.
Yeah.
And the things that did get better, especially in the race context, were pretty much all under Trump, it feels like.
By the way, when I left Chicago to back to Nashville in 2011, I read in the Sun-Times or the Trib that I think it was 75% of the black kids born in Cook County were born out of wedlock. And then later at seminary, we did mission trips to Detroit, and up there it was 85%.
Yeah.
And not a whole lot better with the whites and the Hispanics. I think the whites and Hispanics were in the 30%. Funny thing happened. I was teaching on the south side of Chicago, taught a lot of courses down in the Harvey area and Blue Island and Dalton and that area for Trinity. And I think I probably had as many as 200 students, and wonderful, wonderful folks. But again, it was just, by the way, one thing I loved, I was a pastor on the north side. I would say, okay, where do you guys go to church? And they'd say, oh, I go to Salem Baptist Church, Reverend Meeks. They'd always put the pastor's name almost in the church. And my people would say, I go to Evanston Baptist Church, and I don't know what that guy's name is, but they were wonderful folks. And yet they just, again and again, somehow or other, they would just keep voting for these guys, and it would just auger down. It was just heartbreaking, really.
Yeah, it really is. There were two, I think, interviews. One of them was an interview. One of them was just this guy. He made a video, and it's this white guy, and he walks around, and he put on this Mexican poncho and sombrero, and he put on a little Mexican, and he had two maracas with him, and he walked around a college campus with a bunch of white liberals, and was like, do you find this offensive? And they're like, absolutely, it's not your culture. And then he went to the Hispanic side of town and was like, do you find this offensive? And they're like, no, we love you.
Yeah,
keep it up.
That's right.
Do this more.
Yes.
And he did the same thing with Asians. And there was also an interview, I think it was back in the early 2000s, that kind of resurfaced. And it was this reporter asked this black guy off the street, they were like, what do you think of white people? He's like, they're just like us, but they're white and they're bad at dancing. And like, that was it. And it wasn't
interesting.
Like that's all they cared about. It was
I
like,
think
it's just
more
another
and more
human being.
That's coming back. Two racial things in Chicago that were interesting to me. I taught a rhetoric class, and people would make speeches. Some of the students would do this, and there was surfacing in Chicago with the influx of Hispanics. They were taking all the jobs. I mean, if you go to Chinese restaurants, it's an Hispanic guy. I mean, whatever. And they were coming to Chicago, and they finally got more people than the blacks. And the blacks were resenting this. But it turns out that the Hispanic families were stronger. And in fact, the more reliability was there and to show up for work and the like. And it was a cultural thing, but they resented that because they kind of had their act together. Now, I'm not talking about the gangs that are occupying apartment houses in Aurora, Colorado, or something like that. But still, there was that. But there was we had some young women in our church who did college work in hospitality management. And they were in charge of some pretty big deals at Northwestern University. The dorms would have their own food services, or the engineering school would have a coffee shop or whatever. And they were running these things. And I asked about how is it to get workers and the like. And they were employing a lot of black workers. And he said, but there's a real big difference between the Chicago blacks who would come in to work and then the Lost Boys of Sudan. Now, I've been to Sudan a few times. But in the South, you have very tall people, the Dinka, they call them. And then there's another group, the Nuer, and there is more Christianity in them. There's a famous guy who played in the NBA named Manute Bol, who was very tall and was blocking shots. He was Dinka. Okay.
Right.
So anyway, the Lost Boys fled from Muslim persecution in the South, and they fled to Ethiopia. And then they had war there, so they fled to Kenya. And from those camps, they have been brought. They're called the Lost Boys of Sudan, and they brought them into major cities. And you could see them on Sunday afternoon playing volleyball in parks along the lake. But she said, "You give me a Dinka or Nuer from," and these guys were seriously black, pigmentation, super black. And he says these
under
guys,
the bed black.
these guys are gold.
Yeah.
And it's not pigmentation, it's culture. Now, that's not
Right.
true of all Chicago blacks or all Dinkas, but these guys were, you went black, these were seriously African black. And they would treasure, they'd walk on glass to hire a Dinka or a Nuer from South Sudan. So, and you asked in another context about culture. It's a cultural thing. It's not pigmentation.
Absolutely.
And it's just a shame that they've identified, like Biden will say, if you don't vote for me, you ain't black. You are in no position to say that. Well, anyway, shame on you.
Yes, and Denzel Washington made this point as well. He was asked, "Why do you have a black director for this movie that he was doing?" And he said, "It's not color, it's culture."
Yeah.
Because a black person knows how it feels when when you've just done your hair and you use a pick on it. Or
Yeah.
he gave some example,
The hair
which
is a
I
big
don't
deal.
remember.
It's really harder. I mean, we have friends that just like, it takes a lot more.
Yeah.
Unless you're Michael Jordan or somebody,
Right,
or
you
you're
can
old
go
like
bald.
me. You can
You can go bald.
But that is.
But he was like, it's color, not culture. I don't
Yeah.
care about color.
Yeah.
But I do care about how you grew up and the things that you know and
Right.
those values that you have.
Yeah. He's a preacher's kid, I think.
I think he
actually.
is, and
Yeah.
I don't know if he's a Christian, but he's a well-grounded individual.
Yeah, I think
it seems
he claims to be, and he also does ads for boys' clubs too. I've noticed too, and just what they meant to his life. But
yeah,
I think he's identified as a Christian.
we talked about sports a little bit earlier, and the effect it has on encouraging and providing motivation to go get them and bringing people together as a sense of community.
Yeah.
I think England is famous for this with their much of the world with their soccer games. It's a huge deal. They have 100,000-person
it's
stadiums.
massive.
But one of the things that I was listening to this English guy, and he was saying, the one thing I wish I could have done is gone to an American college so that I could go to a college football game. Because it looks unreal. I mean, you see the Penn State football games with their whiteout, and everyone's got their pom-poms that they're waving, and it's unbelievably loud. The team can't hear what's going on, and it's a bummer that was one of the things that was canceled, because now it feels like at home, and it's like, why would I go out and watch it? It's no longer about the community that is there for the sports. It's more about just the sports, and that wasn't the point. The point is everyone gets together and has a good time, and has a beer and waves their flag and is super excited. And
I had a friend who's a big sports. He's on the faculty at Wheaton when I taught there. And he said, a school needs a team they can cheer for.
Right.
I mean, you pick a sport. The University of Chicago doesn't really have much like that. They used to have football, but it's more of an academic thing. Nice, you get credit, but to just be able to have your colors and go out and cheer for your team. I've been to a rugby match here, and I don't know much about rugby, but it's fun to see people put on the colors and cheer for the team. And by the way, I did my graduate work at Vanderbilt. They just beat the #1 team in the nation, Alabama, and we don't know what to make of that. They tore the goalpost down, and there probably people hadn't slept
they got
yet.
fined, and it was amazing. That's what you want.
Right.
Though. It was fantastic.
So the Divinity School can be a fever swamp of madness, lost people, political correctness. But anchor down, baby. I mean,
we beat Alabama.
We beat Alabama.
Heck
so
yeah.
that has, I think, an antiseptic effect a bit.
And you unite people under that.
Yeah.
And interestingly, post-COVID, the suicide rates have gone up significantly. And I think that's somewhat connected to the fact that people are no longer in community. And part of that is an American thing of it's far less community-oriented and far more individualistic, which has its pros and cons.
Right.
But we have lost the everyone is part of this one thing. I saw a comment the other day that if Liverpool, which is this soccer team in England, and if Liverpool was playing in the middle of a jungle, there'd be at least one tiger that was wearing red.
No, it's a big.
It's
a big deal.
You unite yourself with the rest of the people in this sports center, and in that sense, you have community and you have belonging, and so it's like, okay, I can make it to tomorrow.
Yeah.
And after COVID, when we lost the really the only community we had for a lot of people. Suicide rates have gone up. People are finding identity crises, and it's gotten like the world is a little more gray.
Yeah.
And
No, I agree.
and I think the question is like, how do you get people to come back to community?
Yeah, boy. Great. By the way, it is nice that finally we can go out and do. And by the way, there's a whole culture built around teamship. I can, even though I haven't lived in Chicago for 12 years, I can sing "Go Cubs, go, go." Hey, what do you say? Cubs gonna win today. When they beat Cleveland in the World Series, somebody gave me one of those blue W's on white. It's in my study. But again, sports is not the whole answer to the thing. It's funny how there's a huge movement in evangelicalism now. I call it ingratiationism. It's kind of a market-oriented thing that we can, or to be winsome, or even the Overton window that, there are things that are taboo this way and taboo that way, but in the middle. And so we're going to do, but the thing, it moves like this. So it used to be unthinkable that a trans person would read library books to kids in the local library. But now it's kind of moved into the middle. And what happens is evangelicals who want to be winsome are kind of always looking. You end up punching right because they're the people who are kind of saying, wait, slow down, that's not cool. And then embracing left because you want them to think that you're really nice. And it's a very odd kind of thing. I think there is a growing hunger for, and I've seen conversion accounts that take this into account. I think G.K. Chesterton and William Abraham, who teaches at SMU Methodist School, said that, they're telling me the world's getting better and better, or, you're okay or whatever. And then I read this thing in the Bible that said, hey, things are really out of whack. And he said, and my heart sang, or my soul soared, like finally somebody's telling the truth. And I think that we are so cautious about being offended. You got to catch them before you clean them, this kind of thing. We're so concerned about PR. And there's a place to be said and something to be said for being winsome, but still, I think that you take the edginess out of the Bible. I mean, the Bible's a book with edge, and if you don't preach the whole counsel of God, if you're not straightforward about things, then things just kind of keep drifting, sloshing along. But finally, I mean, I think the way John MacArthur stood up against the COVID thing a bit was kind of exhilarating for some people.
Yeah.
And the way Doug Wilson and others here are awkwardly, Joe Rigney and others are just sort of saying, look, here's this thing they're doing, or whatever, that, they can catch flack, but I think there's a hunger, like finally somebody's talking, there's an adult in the room.
Yeah.
And so part of bringing people back is having the church be the church and the Bible be the whole counsel of God. And I don't know that we'll ever have a majority, but in terms of there being a kind of influence that permeates, you drop certain dye into a thing of water and it spreads out. And I just think we need to have more, along with the Barnabas conciliation and the hug, we need to have more Peter throwing sand, walking around on the table, and Paul coming in with a scalpel.
Right.
And finally people say, oh, I think church is something serious.
Yeah, I think guns a-blazing is a good motto.
Yeah,
But also what we do here is, interestingly, at the end of Grace Agenda conference we have every year, we do this big block party.
I went there.
Oh yeah,
and I got fatter. Yes.
And everyone's invited.
And then you sing.
And then you sing, and it's like a fun time, and there's free food and everything.
Yeah.
I think that I wonder if the way back to celebrating and embracing community as a culture is for the church to lead with community is not only enjoyable, right? It's better to be in community. It's better to be at the block party than alone by yourself on your phone.
Yeah.
And also, it's good for you in that, you're getting free food, which is fantastic.
Yeah.
And you get to see people, and you get to interact with people, and all of this, and you just feel alive.
Yeah.
And I think I wonder if that's the way we need to get back, is for the church to bring people along into the feeling of, hey, being in community is helping me feel alive.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. I saw a Muslim lady with the head covering at the agenda
Right.
thing.
A bunch of people
Yeah.
walked up to me and they're like, hey, what's going on
Yeah,
here?
yeah, it's good. Yeah, I do think absolutely. There is an awfully important thing called evangelism too. That you don't want to just fish in the aquarium, but you go out into the deep, and so there's a lot of risking. You can get slapped down. I mean, I'm told like, oh, listen, don't ever ask somebody where he's from. Like, oh, your accent's a little faint. Oh, that offends them, makes it. No, I mean, 99 times out of 100, I'll say, I'm picking up a little accent here. Where
Where you
oh,
from?
where are you from?
Yeah.
And they'll say, oh yeah, well, I'm from India. Well, I was there a couple of times, and I did the tourist things to Taj and all that in Delhi. Oh yeah, well, I was from such and such, and I've heard down there, and da 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 da. And again, engaging people in conversation. I was asked to write for a Festschrift for this really great guy, seminary prof. And I said, and it was a cultural thing. He said, I want to write on the virtue of friendliness. I was in Chicago a while, well, for years, and I would have this experience. I'd be going into a bank, and an elderly lady would be coming out, and I would step back and hold the door for her, and then she would just walk right along and never acknowledge me, thank you, young man, or whatever. And I thought, did she think I was trying to pick her up? Or, I wanted to put on a lab coat and get a clipboard and chase her down and say, why did you not even acknowledge?
What are your emotions in that moment?
What did you feel about it? I was raised in the South where people talk more and they say, oh, you're very shallow down there because up north we have deep relationships and you guys are also, well, be that as it may. We actually have deep relationships in the South too.
It's just you also have everyone's your friend.
Right. But the guy didn't like it. The editor wasn't real keen. He thought, that seems, the virtues are like prudence and fortitude, this kind of thing. I said, yeah, I've seen other lists with 50. And I said, I think friendliness is one. And I'm exploring this. Is this just a parochial like Opie of Mayberry or something? Or is this a thing? And I concluded that it is actually one of the virtues, that you're amiable, that you're friendly, and even outgoing. And that's a big thing in evangelism. I mean, you could just sit down with somebody who's doing something at a table over here, and hey, there's the Baha'i Temple. I used to live 3 blocks from the Baha'i Temple in Wilmette, whatever. And then I have a business card with a gospel in the back, and it says, well, look, this is the most important thing. My address is on, or my email. Just let me know if you want to know more. And you end up in these conversations with people, and I think you can overdo just concern about the circle of friends if you're not trying to go out to, and by the way, it's so funny. We're afraid that we'll turn people off. Oh, you're buttonholing them, or you're, hellfire and brimstone, or in their face. When our denomination, I'm Southern Baptist, and when our denomination would go to a convention city, we would go in the Saturday before and knock on doors. Like we went to Vegas, we knocked on 120,000 doors in Vegas, I think it was, and pretty much covered the town. Metairie, Louisiana, different places like that. I was in Metairie once, and we got 40 houses we're supposed to knock on, and we're walking down. It's like, do you go to church? If you go to church, where do you go? How often do you go? And then you get into some questions about, suppose you were to die and standing before God, and He asked you, why should I let you into heaven? What would you say? I thought I'd get punched out when I saw that first time. People answer that. And they'll say, well, it's incredible. Evangelism Explosion and Continuing Witness Training asks 2 questions. It's suppose you're standing before God and said, why? And what is the other one? I'm foggy this morning. And people will rise to the occasion. And then you can say, well, and then they're actually 21 verses, and you can give them a little tract or whatever. And I think we had 2,000 people in Vegas respond to the gospel. But anyway, we were going down the street in Metairie, and we could see 4 yards down. There was a guy in some coaching shorts, some spandex coaching shorts, big overhanging. He had Dunlop disease. His belly Dunlopped over his britches, and or chest of drawers machine. His chest had dropped into his drawers, and he had a weed eater and a wife beater T-shirt, and smoking a cigarette, and you're like that. And we thought, oh boy. I bet he thinks we're Mormons or something, but I bet this is not going to go well. He may
Yeah.
put the weed eater in our face. And and we got there. He said, "Well, let's talk." And he cut it off. And this is scope on the porch. And I sat with him on his swing. And he said, "I've been praying that somebody would come to me and talk to me about the Bible and Jesus." And I thought, all right, hold a second. Okay. And it turns out you don't know where people are. And
No.
if I saw once people who come to the Lord have an average of 7 touches of the gospel somewhere. They went to VBS or they heard Billy
Right.
Graham or whatever. You don't know if there's any truth to that. If they're like a 1 or a 7, you know, what God's doing in their life. And I think it's, you know, I believe God opens the life. I mean, I think he's the Lord of salvation, but you don't, you know, it's not like my cleverness or anything like that. But just to see this guy, and he was responsive to the gospel as I sat on the swing in Metairie, Louisiana, out near the New Orleans airport. And he looked like the farthest from possible. And it's just eerie how, if you bring it up, a lot of times it's a brush off. I mean, but in other times, I mean, it's pleasant. Other times it's like, I need to know more about that.
Yeah, and oftentimes in the big city, people are far less friendly. I think part of that is also safety.
It's safety.
Is a concern.
I was going to say that because I have had the case of striking a conversation with a guy on an L platform. And then, you know, this I can think of 2 times particularly, where then they'll kind of follow up, and then they follow up, and then they want to, you know, and it's like, so you're cautious, you know. I don't put my home address on my card, okay?
Yeah.
I put an email and a phone number, and still,
Yeah.
you know, it's
And if you feel safe, you
Yeah.
feel like this person is not intimidating, is not
Yeah.
gonna, you know, ask you for your money later.
right,
You're far like people are generally, I feel like they kind of want to be friendly.
yeah,
Like if you
No, you're right.
there's
You're
a
right.
principle in selling as well. Like people are, if you ask someone for something, they're far less likely to say no than you would think,
yeah,
just because they would feel bad. They
Yeah.
kind of like people want to oblige.
yeah,
They want
yeah.
to be helpful. And if you walk down, I was walking down the street the other day, and this, I think a Vandals fan had
Yeah.
these giant Vandals, yellow and black overalls
Yeah,
that were just
Striped.
outrageous.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And he had no shirt on under them, and I was like,
Yeah.
fantastic overalls. And he's
Yes.
like, dude, thanks, appreciate it.
Yeah,
And,
no, it's
like-
right. Just a compliment, or like,
Uh,
I
that's all-
covet
that's all
those
it
shoes.
is.
Would you give them to me? Or I mean, just silly stuff. No, we were driving. We went to Walla Walla and Pendleton one day on this break. We just took off in our car, and in the middle of some part of the Palouse somewhere down in northeast Oregon or southeast Washington, we went forever. There wasn't a gas station and even a restroom, and they put it like a service restaurant. I mean, just restroom right out there, men and women's in the middle
Yeah.
of nowhere, which was quite merciful. So we met. I came out, and my wife was talking to this guy. Had a big trailer he was pulling, and another guy pulled up. And when I came out, she was talking to them, and it turns out they were from Spokane, and they were doing this and that. And another guy walked up. And where are you from? Well, you know, we're living that. Well, I was looking to move to Franklin. Franklin, that's where our church is. And we live in Franklin. We start talking about this, and we're here to teach. And then I mentioned the college and the Christian connection. You kind of gossip the Lord in a sense. And we had the most amiable thing just at a restroom with strangers out in the Palouse or something. And
Yeah.
people want to talk. I mean, it's a wonderful thing. And again, you can just drop things. And a lot of times, you know, you maybe think, oh, I got a preacher here, but I make a joke. I'm an old Baptist preacher or whatever, and then, okay, and then we talk, and
Then they know what to expect, and they're like, yeah.
right. And
It's
so,
just
and then sometimes they'll come to church. I mean, it's
yeah, absolutely. So how do we get that back? Because we have lost it.
yeah. I mean, I think we're fearful of offending. Yeah, boy, it's hard to know. They say in evangelism, the hardest door to get through is your own front door. I mean, you don't have to get inside the guy's house, but I've knocked on a lot of doors, and you just think, this was a thing our church would do when I was a pastor in Arkansas, and we go out on Tuesday nights, and I remember going to one guy he was the owner of the big department store in town, or the manager, and his wife would come to church, but he wouldn't. So we go in there, and back when MTV was music videos, they had a guy named Lionel Richie, I think it was. And he was saying, all night long, there was dancing in the street, da, da, da. And it's just chaos, and they got the kids running around. And so I go to Scott, and talking a little bit. I said, maybe if we could turn. Oh, and he's unaware. Oh, yeah, sure. He responded to the gospel. Later on, he contacted me from a big town in Louisiana and said, I'm on the pulpit committee of a church. Can you recommend a name? And it was like I was competing with music videos with a lost husband. And while he was there one day, he called me and he said, an employee wants to take off to get an abortion. Would you come talk to her? And so I went to his office. She was not pleased with that, but still, you just don't know. So
Yeah.
you're really not trusting in the power of God.
Is it just fear of
To work.
rejection?
I think it's fear of rejection or awkwardness, offense. I think a lot of it is just fear, or it's actually not a sign that you're not confident in the power and will of God to save people out of the pagan pool, so to speak. And I mean, he's sovereign. He saves who he
Yeah.
wants. But I mean, you can boom, and all of a sudden here's like, really? God can do it. So
Yeah.
you trust in that.
And it's not always evangelical. You're not always preaching the gospel to them. But there was
Right.
this guy that did a famous experiment where one summer, for the
Yeah.
entire summer, all he did was walk around. I think it was some big city, maybe New York
Right.
City.
Right.
And all he did was walk up to people and ask, can I have $100? That was it. Can I have $100?
Right.
And like 99% of the people said no.
Yeah.
But that 1% said yes, and he got $100, and it's like, oh, that's cool. But he was training himself.
Yeah.
He's like, I need to be okay with rejection.
Yeah.
I need to be okay with 99 people saying no. What
That's
the heck?
interesting.
Go away.
That is really interesting.
And then the 1% like, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
And you never know what's going to happen.
You never know.
But
Yeah.
the fear of rejection is not a good reason
Right.
to like. What's the worst that can happen?
Yeah.
Realistically, like run the math. What is the
Yeah.
worst that can happen? And if it does happen, like we're all going to be
Yeah.
dead in 100 years.
That's exactly right.
But is
Yeah.
anyone really? Is it really
Yeah.
going to matter that much?
Yeah.
Just shoot the shot.
I heard of a Moody Bible Institute. I read it in Newsweek, actually. A Moody MBI student who a mugger approached him on the. It used to be a rougher neighborhood. Now it's upscale, called River North, and threatened him with held a gun on him. He said, "What, are you threatening me with heaven?" I mean, that kind of thing. But like yesterday, we were in Spokane. We ate at this coffee house, kind of like Bootser mixture. And so we were saying thanks to the Lord for our meal, and the waitress walks up, and when we finished, I'm so sorry, and I said, no, is there anything we'll pray for you too? And I prayed for her. I found, like, I remember in Avon, Indiana, near Indianapolis, we were knocking on doors, and we came to a lady out at her mailbox and said, "Oh, we're just here. There's a new church coming in here," and he said, "No, I'm Catholic," and we said, that's fine. And sometimes just out of meanness, I'll say, "Oh, who's the priest there?" And sometimes they don't know, but anyway, it's kind of fun. But anyway, I said, "Well, is there just anything we could pray for you for?" And she says, "Well, my daughter has chosen some bad friends, and I'm feeling bad about it." I said, "Well, let's just pray." And we just bowed our heads and prayed for her earnestly. And when we lifted our heads, she was crying. And we realized she doesn't have people who pray for her. I mean, we do. We go to a church thing in a small
Right.
group and say, "Yeah, I've got,
X and Y problem,
X, Y, physical or whatever," and people pray for her. But to have somebody pray, you can just pray for people, and that's very discombobulating in a good way.
It's fantastic. You've traveled quite a bit abroad as
Yeah.
well. How have you found the different corners of the globe? What was that experience like?
Yeah, I mean, it's splendid. And my grandfather founded the Detroit Economic Club, and he was wealthy. My mom's a Michigander who married a chaplain in World War II, and he was up at the Ford Motor Company Naval Works, and they met, and she decided to marry him. He was so put out. She was a class officer at the University of Michigan, and fancy her brother went to Harvard, and she's throwing her life away to marry this preacher from a broken home in the South, who was a chaplain at the time. And he didn't even go to the wedding. I mean, he was so put off. He was disgusted. My dad later went on to get a doctorate at Edinburgh in church history. But anyway, but once the kids came along, he melted. So when I came out of high school that summer, he sent the whole family around the world, a 6-week tour around the world in the nicest hotels, and everybody from
Oh, wow.
Tokyo to Bangkok to Cairo to Zurich to you name it.
Wow.
So there was that privilege. So I got to do that. And then later, just in terms of church work, we did tons of mission trips. So I'm in interior Brazil, I'm in Moscow, I'm in all over places. And a variety of things came. First, it's just incredible what man has done in different settings. I've taught aesthetics. I mean, just in that narrow area. I saw Kabuki Theater in Tokyo. I saw the Golden Palace in Kyoto, went to the Louvre. I mean, just all the arts and the like. But one thing I've been struck by is that Judeo-Christian culture is so much healthier. I mean, even physically, I'll just tell you, I've gotten really sick in some Muslim places and even South America, building a church in the Amazon region. Some nice people in the neighborhood brought pudding for us to eat, the helpers. I got hepatitis A from that.
Yep.
And they say, don't eat the lettuce, Okay. So I'm biking up the Nile. We're handing out tracts from Luxor to Aswan. And we stayed in these hotels. One was $2 a night. The $4 a night hotel, I got a rat bite on the lip. You don't want that.
No.
But the generators go off at midnight in this $4 hotel way up in Idfu or Isna, Kamambo, someplace. And I thought, whoa, what was that? And so I thought, oh, well, it's an insect or it's who knows. So I turned the light on and I put the sheet over my head and I thought, okay, I'll go to sleep. And by the way, the light was so, how to kill a roach is you turn the light on, off, on, and he's out of like that and he has a little heart attack. But that's a silly joke. But anyway, so I thought, but then all of a sudden I felt like, and I threw it off and this big brown rat ran to the bathroom where they dug holes in the wall. And so I called the guy down front, and he sprayed Black Flag down these holes. It was stupid, but at any rate, it didn't break the skin, but it was puffy. And the guys joked that the rat died, but anyway, so you got that. So I'm getting hepatitis here on that big luxurious trip. We stayed in the Nile Hilton. I brushed my teeth with the tap water, and then I spent 2 days in Jerusalem just trying not to die from whatever. Pharaoh's Revenge
from the tap water.
From the tap water, and then you go through. I've been all over Southeast Asia. I have a missionary son who's been a missionary for 17 years in Southeast Asia, so we go out there a lot. And there are just sections of sidewalks that are gone. You're walking along, and then there's just a hole in the ground where somehow they just didn't repair it, and you can fall in, and so it's dangerous just to walk around. I go to Moscow. And you were buying stuff, we're changing money out. And then I needed extra, so I went to the ATM in the hotel. And it turns out the real rate that they use it was something like 10 times the backdoor exchange rate. And so I came home with like $1,000 phone bill when I thought it was $100, calling my wife for. And the madness of falling apart Russia, Sudan. Don't get me started there. Parts of Egypt, parts of this and that. And you think just in terms of like safety and sanity, just being, I came up out of the ground in London, actually, in one of the kind of the Muslim areas up in Camdenton. And I saw this beat down thing above the subway where just one woman's just on top of another, just beating the snot out of her. And I'm thinking, I've been in Chicago 17 years. I've never seen that at the L. So Switzerland's beautiful. Japan is beautiful. Thank God for the cathedrals of, whatever. But just a Judeo-Christian, even American thing is still, we may be a cut flower where the bloom is still on the rose, but it's withering. But still, there's enough bloom. I mean, we lament America to our British friends, and they say, compared to Europe, you're in revival in America. So we have a treasure here, but boy, we're squandering it fast, and so sad.
And a lot of it, I think, is also, or at least part of it, is immigration.
Yeah.
And the new cultures are being brought in.
Absolutely.
How does America keep its own culture, its own lifeblood? Well, at the same time, these people are coming in, and sometimes even necessarily.
Yeah, boy. I mean, of course, you open the floodgates, and sometimes, like, we have a lot of Californians moving to Nashville. I've noticed they have a sign here, let's not Californicate, Idaho.
Yeah, wipe the blue off your shoe.
Yeah, that's right. And a lot of them are. Some of the most conservative people we know have come from California, running out. But then there are others who are saying, Nashville's cool and the taxes are lower, And like, no. From Mexico, Nicaragua, Venezuela. Yeah, don't come up with so much like we've got to have all this pride from down there. You're running away from something.
Right.
And by the way, there are no plumbers or insurance salesmen running from Chicago to Nicaragua for asylum.
Ironic.
Ironic, yes. So I think culture. Boy, you go to Minneapolis and you have that whole Somali thing. That who's the senator, the congressman from there?
Ilhan Omar or
Yeah,
something.
Omar. Yeah, just oh my goodness, what? And yet these daffy liberals are like, oh, diversity is our strength, and let a thousand flowers bloom. Like, are you morons? I mean, just go spend a week in Khartoum or whatever. I write some for American Spectator, and I wrote once about requiring First Amendment affidavits. I mean, if they're coming from a Muslim country, Saudi Arabia, what have you, then have Christians or non-believers in those countries send an affidavit like this person is a First Amendment kind of person. I mean, if you want to know what a religion or a culture is like, go to where it's concentrated.
Right.
Oh, Muslims or Islam's a religion of peace. Oh, it's wonderful. They're this, and this.
Go to Iraq.
Yeah, go to Saudi Arabia. Tell me that.
Yeah.
That's the mother place.
Right.
So just have them if they come from whatever, Iraq, Iran, you name it. Not Iran, they're not coming in now, but Iraq or Afghanistan. Just say, do you have a First Amendment? No state religion, freedom of religion, freedom of expression. Can you have people who lived over there vouch for them? Because what they'll do, they'll come in from a place where they have crushed Christians with dimitude and worse, and then they come to Chicago and they'll want to build a mosque in Villa Park or something like that and take over a school. And okay, but if anybody has reservations, they all turn into Thomas Jefferson. You're like, this is outrageous, the American thing. Like, excuse me, that was nothing to you in your former place. Don't act like you're some kind of Jeffersonian,
Right.
purist. So I just think we need to be sure. And also, poor Canada, you've got the French and the English and how it's so disjointed. The West resents the East, and you got this knucklehead Trudeau. They wouldn't touch him with a stick in parts of Alberta. And you have the two sides. It's like, no, this is an English-speaking place. We are enriched. Our language is enriched. The Brits come over, and they got so tired of calling the guy who employed them master. The Dutch were across, and they had the word boss. I said, that's what we want. He's not my master. Hey, boss, I'll be back. And so we have pajamas and bungalow from India, and we have, French deja vu. I mean,
I think America should just conquer Canada, and we'll just get that all over.
Well, it's time.
It's been time for a while.
By the way, we tried to, on our 50th anniversary, we tried to do Rail Canada all the way from Halifax to Vancouver, and they shut the whole country down. So we did Amtrak from Chicago around, and but Trudeau, what are they thinking?
It's a sorry sight. But you do if you come to America. It's I wrote this up, and I don't know if this is the best analogy, but it's like a little bit that you've been graduated, like you're now at the adult table. You can no longer act like a kid.
Yeah.
You're here. You have to, like, there are a certain set of rules and standards and cultural norms that you must follow. You can't eat the cats.
Yeah.
You can't eat the ducks out of the pond.
Yeah.
And religion makes up a lot of the culture, and so you have to, you must at least be culturally Christian.
Right.
You move here from Iraq, okay, fine, as long as you go through the legal immigration process.
Yeah.
But you're no longer in Iraq, which means you now live like a cultural Christian.
Right.
That's how it works.
The melting pot instead of,
And if you are not, and if you hate America, which a lot of these liberals do.
Yeah.
Go to the country you love.
Yeah.
And if it's not America, okay, great. Go to Nicaragua. Go to, it might be France.
Reasonable.
It might be Spain. Wherever it is, go there.
Yeah.
But America is for the people who want to be in America.
Yeah.
And who want to make America better.
Yeah, I agree. I agree.
And that's I think the policy that we need to have with immigration and immigrants is you are here, and you're here because we are kind enough to let you in.
Yeah.
Not because you deserve it.
Yeah.
Really.
And by the way, and I'm so tired of liberals beating people up who have any objection to say anything like what you say. You're racist. You're xenophobic. You're this. You're this. Like,
Sure.
no, we're sane.
Yep.
You know.
I want to keep America,
Yeah.
America,
Yeah.
instead of whatever you're trying to make it.
Exactly.
As we kind of wrap up here, I always like to ask, what's your best piece of advice you would give to anyone watching?
Oh man. Wow. Well, of course, be a Christian. Love the Lord. Grow in the faith. Take His discipline. Take His blessings. I married up. I found a wife who is, whither thou goest, I will go. As Irma Bombeck said, she's never considered divorce, but murder's crossed her mind. I'm sure. So I've uprooted her, and I've had her building in the Amazon jungle, and I've had her going across dangerous streams in Khartoum and knocking on doors with evangelism. And so I just married up if you can, married above your station if you can.
Yeah.
And I would be on the road a lot as a denominational servant, and when my son retired as a Marine major, he was in the Iraq War twice. My oldest son, we were at Camp Lejeune, and they gave him a chance to say some things, and anyway, he thanked his mother for teaching him discipline. I thought, well, excuse me, I was there, but apparently I was gone so long. She actually raised them, and my best thing was just to be out of their lives. So, but I hope that's not true.
Yes,
but I mean that's
sure
just this enormous blessing, because the family is, I mean, it's the first institution. I mean, it's in early part of Genesis. It's not like academia. It's not business. It's not military. It's the family.
The family and the church are the groundwork of sanity.
So by God's grace, I've had a wife, and who's been good. And I just thank God for having godly parents, and she had godly parents, and I went to raised in Sunday school. And someone once asked me during the Southern Baptist Convention controversies over should we have inerrantists teach in our seminaries, and so I was one of the guys who came into a seminary to turn it inerrantist. And one said, "How did you become an inerrantist?" I had to think. I just never got over Sunday school. I mean, they just told me this was it, and I found no reason not to
I have
believe
no reason
it.
not to believe it.
When I went to Wheaton, I'll close with this. When I went to Wheaton, they had a doctrinal statement, and I knew most of the stuff there, but they had verbal plenary inspiration. And I thought, I think I know what verbal means and plenary and inspiration, but this is a term of art.
Yes.
So I called my daddy and I said, what is that? And he said, you believe that? And I did, as they say, from Genesis to maps.
That's the great thing about parents. You can call them, and I have no idea what this is. Help.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
So where can people find you and your work online?
Oh, I don't know how I got into it, but I ended up with some students at Southern putting together markcoppenger.com, markcoppenger.com. And I riff on encounters. I saw a guy with a lentil shirt down at Costco in Lewiston, Lentil Festival, and I had a lentil diet once, so I riffed on lentils. And I was at Little Bighorn, and I saw a guy on a motorcycle from the Sturgis Rally, and I talked about experiences there. And so I just kind of do that. And then things I publish, articles and books and chapters in books and commendations I write, blurbs I write, and then audiovisual stuff. And I just have a guy out in North Carolina, and I just send him stuff, and he puts it up there. And
fantastic.
so, yeah.
I'll put links in the description and everything.
Oh, thanks.
So,
I appreciate that.
Well, thank you and your son for your service, and also thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been wonderful.
A privilege. Great talking with you.
Yeah, absolutely. See you guys.